Our next speaker is Mr. Peter Vaughan. Peter is the CEO of Greenlife Industry Australia, AIPH member in Australia. And it's the industry representative body for production and retail nurseries and allied stakeholders in Australia. Peter has worked there and it's its predecessor, Nursery and Garden Industry Australia, since April 2015. Peter is a highly experienced manager in the development and commercialization of innovative technologies in Australian agriculture. And for over 30 years, he has worked in industry, commercial, and research and development organizations and understand the challenges of providing leadership and support to drive key industry initiatives while using the resources available as effectively as possible. And we're pleased to welcome Peter, especially because it's quite late at night in Australia, and we appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to join us today. So please, can we have the presentation now?
Hi everyone, my name is Peter Vaughan and I am the Chief Executive Officer for Greenlife Industry Australia, which is the industry representative body for production and retail nurseries across the country. I'd like to thank AIPH for the invitation and opportunity to present at this International Plant Health Conference, where I'll provide an overview of Australia's plant health system and demonstrate the collaboration between industry, government and regulators. In my presentation, I'll provide an overview of the Australian nursery industry statistics. I'll provide an indication of the government arrangements and why Australia is different from many countries across the world. And then I'll provide a bit of detail on the Greenlife Industry Australia Biosecure Hassa program, which is a co-regulated program by industry and government and is a national nursery industry biosecurity program for Australia. Firstly, to the Australian nursery industry statistics. And for the last 4 years, we've been conducting an annual survey of production nurseries, of which there are around 1,600 in Australia. The Australian financial year runs from July to June, and the statistics presented here are for the last financial year, being July 2019 to June 2020. And the nursery gate sales were 2.6 billion, the number of plants sold, 2.2 billion, the turnover per hectare is $440,000. We also look at the key issues facing the industry. And the 4 key ones that we found from the survey this year were around maintaining demand, having a productive workforce, water security, and plant biosecurity. And invariably, when we look at the key issues facing industry, plant biosecurity rates near the top, if not number 1. We also look at grower confidence for the future of the industry. And at the moment, it's at 90% of having confidence of the industry and the prosperity going forward. This is part based on the increased understanding of importance of plant health and of plants and their contribution to health and well-being, as well as being underpinned by a very strong biosecurity system across Australia. Those statistics are shown graphically here, and as you can see in the left-hand table, the plant sales value and number have increased significantly since 2016 to 2020. The pie chart shows plant sales by product category, and the key category you'll see there are the perennials, trees and shrubs, making up 42%. And another important category is indoor plant sales, which is at 13%. And we've seen a significant increase in them over the last year, in particular as more people have been working from home and having green life and plants in their home offices and generally around the house due to the health, well-being and productivity of having plants in the house. The nursery industry also has a large number of supply chains it supplies into, that being the retail sector, which takes around 50% of Greenlife, also the landscape sector, the fruit, vegetable and nut production sectors, as well as government and developer infrastructure projects and forestry. So we're a very diverse nursery production that we provide across the country. So now I'll turn to the government arrangements for Australia's plant health system. There are two levels of government across the international and national biosecurity continuum for Australia. Nationally, there is obviously the Australian government, and it has responsibility for pre-border and border responsibility, and that's around the import and export of plant material. As you can imagine, being an island, we don't have a lot of commercial trade through import or export. The main importation, which is managed through Australia's plant quarantine, is for the importation of new plant varieties and germplasm, but generally in small plant numbers or as tissue culture or as budwood. And within quarantine, they need to be grown out and assessed for any plant pests and disease to ensure they are clean before being allowed into the country. From an export point of view, it's a very limited market and less than 1% of all production. Domestically, we have 6 state and 2 territory governments, and they manage the post-border. So once plant material is in the country, they manage the intra and interstate market access activities for movement of plants across the country. Usually, one of these state or territory governments is the lead government agency if there is an emergency plant pest eradication due to an incursion. If we look at the government arrangements for the Australian plant health system, internationally, Australia is a signatory to the International Plant Protection Convention, and through that is a member of the Pacific Plant Protection Organisation, which is involved in the harmonising of phytosanitary measures and fostering cooperation of members in the Pacific region. The Australian government negotiates all import and export phytosanitary requirements and obligations, and these are aligned to adopted standards, being the international standards for phytosanitary measures. As I said, this is primarily from an import point of view around new germplasm coming into the country, and also from a limited export point of view. Domestically, the state and territory governments are signatories to the Intergovernmental Agreement on Biosecurity, and it sets the domestic structure for plant health and biosecurity. And it has a cascading system of committees. At the top is the National Biosecurity Committee, under that is a Plant Health Committee, and under that are subcommittees, one for market access, which manages the inter and intrastate movement of plants, and one for diagnostics, which, as you can imagine, is vital for Australia as we're trying to determine if there is, when there is a plant pest incursion, what that may be. Another very important arrangement within Australia is the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed, and the plant industry and government parties are signatories to this. So it includes many of the plant industries across Australia, obviously the nursery industry, all those industries involved in fruit, vegetable and nut production, the forestry sector, and it also includes the federal, state and territory governments. It is a voluntary agreement for decision making and cost sharing when there is an emergency plant pest incursion across the country. The deed was specifically established to manage stakeholder investment in decision making and funding for emergency plant pests, in particular if there is a decision is made to eradicate that plant pest. Plant Health Australia was specifically established around 20 years ago to coordinate this government industry partnership. So Plant Health Australia is the custodian of the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed, as well as Plant Plan, which provides the eradication guide if there is an incursion. Plant Health Australia will review eradication responses and resolve any issues around the deed between government and industry signatories. They also facilitate any changes or improvements that need to be made to that deed. Now if we turn to Greenlife Industry Australia's Biosecure Hassa program, which is a plant protection and biosecurity systems approach to managing plant health and biosecurity from an industry point of view and movement of plants across the country. It is co-regulated, being a government and industry partner, with that industry organisation being Greenlife Industry Australia. It received national approval through the Plant Health Committee in November 2015, and that was after quite a bit of discussion and work with the state government to get their approval, and that was done by the Subcommittee on Domestic Quarantine and Market Access over the October 2014 to April 2015 period. It has recognition of the high health status of certified growers, and it provides a harmonised approach to intra and interstate market access. The state government biosecurity agencies provide oversight of this program, and that's where we have this co-regulation, and they conduct biennial audits of the Biosecure Hassa program. We are currently initiating federal government recognition for the program to help with the import and export of plant material into the country. I'll now briefly touch on the mechanisms behind Biosecure Hassa. And Hassa, as you'd most likely aware, is a hazard analysis and critical control point program. So within the Biosecure Hassa guidelines, we have the Hassa tables around the hazards and control points. We have biosecurity procedures which describe the processes for the program. We have records and templates which are there for the recording of processes. We also have entry condition compliance procedures which set the rules and requirements and procedures for movement of plants material into intra and interstate. It has a governance administration framework managed by Greenlife Industry Australia. There are terms and conditions under which the production nurseries are approved, and it has a web-based data and audit management system, so everything is online, and this is referred to as the AMS. So Biosecure Hassa basically provides production nurseries with domestic market access. A business must be accredited under GIA under the Greenlife Industry Australia Nursery Industry Accreditation Program, which is a best management practice program, and then when they're accredited for that best management program, they can apply to become Biosecure Hassa accredited. They then implement the relevant Biosecure Hassa procedures and management of records. This information is uploaded records to that audit management system I referred to, and they then receive Biosecure Hassa certification awarded upon compliance with the Biosecure Hassa. Where upon receiving certification doesn't automatically allow businesses to manage the movement of plant material. They must then implement pest-specific entry condition compliance procedures, which are developed by Greenlife Industry Australia and submitted and approved by the various state government agencies. The production nurseries must nominate competent staff and train them against the emergency condition compliance procedures. They then apply for approval and certification against those procedures, and once that occurs, they can then manage the movement of plant material intra and interstate. I hope you now have a better understanding of the Australian plant health system and the interrelationship between industry and government organisations to ensure that we have a very safe and secure plant health and biosecurity system for the country. Thank you again to AIPH for the opportunity to present, and I look forward to catching up soon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, Peter, for your presentation there to look over the plant health systems that you are operating in Australia. A very helpful, good overview. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for joining us at this unearthly hour for you there in Australia. So thank you very much.
No problems, Tim. Hi everyone. Yeah, just about 1:45 in the morning.
Okay. Yeah, eyes are still open. That's good. And again, if anyone has any questions, pop them in the chat. Australia is known around the world as being a country that does take plant health seriously and has that ability to control it. And yet it's interesting also, it's a country that has implemented quite a strong internal system of plant health control involving industry and government, and quite a sophisticated system, I think, compared to many countries. How do the growers feel about it? Do they believe in the scheme, or do they feel it works for them, or are they grudging in the involvement in it?
Certainly some that do believe in it, Tim. Where there's, as I indicated, there's around about 1,600 production nurseries across the country, but only 150 of them have taken up our best management practice, which is the Nursery Industry Accreditation Scheme. And at the moment, we've only got around 20 or so that are accredited, and another 20 or so that are leading to accreditation under the Biosecure Hassa. The reason for that is that the state governments still also offer a scheme that allows plants to be moved across the country. So there's a competitive force there that the production nurseries can work with the state governments to also do it. So we provide it as a commercial service, which underpinned by the NIASA scheme. Helps with their best management practice, but then there's also the additional costs of being involved. And the reason that I did stress on intrastate movement as well is that in Queensland there is an infestation of red imported fire ant in and around Brisbane. So and there's quite a few production nurseries in that area. So for any production nurseries that need to move plant material out of that red imported fire ant zone, they need to produce under a scheme and agree with those entry compliance procedures to get plants out of that zone. So we do have, that's why I did stress the point about intrastate and interstate movement.
Okay, because I was trying to understand the element of what is voluntary and what is compulsory between what you have. So it seems that not all growers would be members of your scheme, but because there are other schemes that the states operate, then they have to be members of one. Is that a requirement that to operate? Is it like a license to trade that they must be members of a scheme?
Well, it's not really being, from the state point of view, they just need to meet their procedures. So they'll get an inspector to come out to their nurseries, who will then inspect the plants, look at their procedures, which would be voluntary procedures to meet those state government requirements. And if they pass them, then they have that ability. Our scheme is probably more stringent at the moment, and we're looking, and that's where it isn't being adopted as much as, say, the state schemes. but from the accreditation scheme, the Best Management Program, it has reasonable uptake. And I know that the focus today is really on ornamental, but we're also having that transgressing over into production horticulture as well. So for avocado production, banana production, macadamia production, we have specific modules for them around their plant health.
Okay, thank you. And we've got a question about the costs of the scheme financed by the government or by industry.
So our scheme is a fee-for-service scheme, and the cost, I can give the actual cost. If you're a member of the association, it is cheaper. It's $1,500 a year. But if you're not a member, then it's $2,500. So that's to encourage businesses to become members of their state or the national association.
Okay, great, thank you. And I imagine there was some government support in setting up the program, was there originally?
The government support is through the levy system, Tim, which I think you're aware of, where in Australia we have a levy on all plants. It's called the Nursery Products Levy. It is paid on the sale of the plastic pots or other containers into which plants are grown. 5% of that wholesale price goes to the government. And from an R&D point of view, that levy is matched dollar for dollar by the federal government to go into R&D activities. And part of the activities for our accreditation and best management practice did have that support of all levy payers, being the production nurseries, and of the federal government.
Okay, thank you. Got a question here. In practice, in what forum do government and trade get together to discuss plant health matters? Is it through Plant Health Australia that you referred to, or something else?
Yeah, it is, Tim. Yeah. So Plant Health Australia, there are around 50 members made up of the federal government and the 8 state and territory governments, and there's around 40 odd industry bodies. And I alluded to us being we're a very active member because if there's a plant pest incursion for ornamentals or for production horticulture or forestry, we tend to get drawn into it because we're at the beginning of that supply chain. So for any plant pest incursion across horticulture, Greenlife Industry Australia gets drawn into it. We have 2 meetings with Plant Health Australia each year. We're all, last year they're done virtually, but this year we're hoping to have a face-to-face in May. They're generally held May and November. And the signatories to the emergency plant pest deed convene to talk through the deed and then any other issues of importance from a plant health point of view across the country.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've still got questions coming in, so if you didn't mind keeping up a few more minutes before you hit the bed, then would you mind just answering on the chat some of those questions, and maybe put a website in for there's a question of how to find out more about the Biosecure Hassa as well, if you have that information.
Yep.
But thanks very much, Peter. We really appreciate you joining us tonight in your time, and I hope you're able to get a good rest after all of this, and thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Tim, and I might hang around to hear Leonardo and a couple of others.
He's really up for the long haul tonight. Good.
Yeah. Okay,
Excellent.
thanks, Tim. Good to catch up.